There are 12 different support weapons, all of which have amazing uses in Helldivers 2, but as you may know, each weapon will have their own situations at which they thrive, as well as situations where they're pretty much useless. In today's video, we'll be looking at it from a solo player point of view, and we will be ranking the 12 weapons in order from least useful to most useful overall. We'll talk about it from both the automaton point of view as well as the Terminid faction point of view. Now before we get to this list, do keep in mind to not take this list as the absolute truth for every mission, as there are many variables that go into play that can make a certain stratagem be more useful than others in certain situations. Now we'll be considering this list from an overall solo perspective in high difficulties rather than specific scenarios. Starting off in last place, we've got the laser pointer. Like, literally, that's what this should be called. This weapon would be deadlier if it were a laser pointer, matter of fact. The laser is in last place by far, as it has pretty much no upside to it. Its damage is minimal, it has no armor penetration, it has limited ammo, planet effects can make it even worse than what it is, and you have to stand still like bait while you're firing off this slowly turning weapon that struggles even to take down the weakest of enemies in either one of the factions. I really won't waste any time on this weapon, as it's clearly in desperate need of a buff, as it's honestly an absolute joke right now. Pretty much every primary and secondary weapon in the entire game will outperform the support weapon, so there's truly no need to ever equip this. Now moving on to 11th place, I think to no one's surprise, we've got the Flamethrower. I personally love the concept of a Flamethrower, and I feel the Flamethrower sounds like everything you'd need when dealing with a large swarms of bugs. Sure, I understand it not being that great against automatons, but for bugs, it should be amazing, right? Well, sadly, in Helldivers 2, the Flamethrower is rather underwhelming. For dealing with small bugs, it'll work as you'd expect it to. The large blast of fire will melt those little guys trying to rush up on you, but there are just so many downsides for using the Flamethrower that I cannot recommend it to any player in any scenario. The Flamethrower has a really underwhelming damage, which is a shame because I feel like the Flamethrower should be a really strong solution to dealing with armored targets, as armor is irrelevant against fire, but it actually sucks against armored units, especially the Charger, as they have very large health pools, so you end up spending ages trying to take them down with the Flamethrower. I think the Flamethrower should have a damage buff against these armored units to make this weapon more worth using, but as of right now, it really struggles at simply doing damage. Now of course, the Flamethrower will also leave a damage over time on the target as well as on the floor, but its damage is not as nearly as impactful as you'd hope it to be. Not to mention, the Flamethrower is an extremely dangerous weapon for self-harm as well as for killing teammates were you to be playing in a group. Against the automatons, it gets even worse, as you pretty much need to get very close to your enemies to even have a shot at dealing damage to them. And just that idea in itself makes this weapon horrible at dealing with automatons. The only great thing about the Flamethrower for automatons is that it'll kill Striders with extreme ease. But even then, we have better choices for dealing with Striders on this list. On to 10th place, we've got the Arc Thrower, and I'll say this weapon has quite a bit of potential, and I could see some people using this were it to be buffed. The Arc Thrower, for better or for worse, has a mind of its own when it comes to aiming. It's got a certain degree of aim assist that I personally really dislike, and it makes hitting weak spots quite a nuisance for me, but maybe console players who have it a little bit harder for aiming could see more use out of this weapon. Its damage is actually not all that bad, and it's got a decent amount of armor penetration, being able to kill Chargers flat out by shooting anywhere in its body within a couple of shots, definitely making it not such a horrible choice for lower level difficulties, and its pros and cons will apply the same way for both factions. The big issue with this weapon is that charging it up takes far too long. I think it takes longer to charge than the Railgun, and it's miles away from being anywhere near as good. If it were possible to charge this weapon a little bit faster, and I could totally see this weapon in use, but as of right now, most other choices in this list will outperform the Arc Thrower in most sense. The Arc Thrower will be easily overwhelmed by enemy units as it fires far too slow to perform anywhere near the top level. Moving up to 9th place, we've got the Spear. The Spear is an amazing launcher with very strong capability of dealing with armored targets, but the major problem with it is for solo players is that it's just too much of a burden to use the Spear over the other armor dealing choices in this list. The spear is quite powerful. It can one-hit certain armor targets, such as for example the automaton towers, and in case you didn't know, even locks onto automaton facility buildings as well. But the problem with the spear is that not only does it reload very slowly, which makes dealing with multiple armored units extremely difficult, but it also sucks at dealing with anything near you, as the missile requires you to have quite a long distance between you and your target for the missile to even be able to hit. It also doesn't one-hit Bio-Titans unless you accidentally hit it in the face like you see here in the background, and it occupies your backpack slots to carry the missiles with you, meaning you have to be defenseless against targets near you, and you won't even be able to equip any backpack stratagems such as a shield generator or even the jump pack to bail you out. For dealing with armored targets, we've got far better choices on this list that outshines the spear in pretty much every sense of the word. The spear has its uses for group play, but for solo play, in my eyes, it's a complete waste, and once again, a weapon I could never see myself equipping if I'm playing solo. It struggles equally against both factions, but I find that it performs a little bit better against the automaton factions due to its extremely long range, being able to deal with facilities and towers hundreds of meters away. But either way, for solo play, I'd recommend to steer clear of this weapon. Moving on to number 8, we've got a non-armored unit dealing weapon. Matter of fact, much of the contrary, the Stalwart. And I hope I'm pronouncing that right. The thing is, the Stalwart would make a great primary weapon, not a support weapon, a primary weapon. This weapon is equipped as a support weapon, but you can rock this bad boy pretty much as a primary weapon. With the supply pack, I was able to play an entire game equipped with the Stalwart, and it's actually quite a powerful choice to use as a primary. It reloads just as fast as most primaries, you can reload while running, and it got a shit ton of bullets. Now just like most primaries, it doesn't really deal with armored units very well, and it's actually pretty much the only choice in this list that it doesn't do so. Now if it's such a decent weapon, why is it ranked this low? The Stalwart should have been a primary weapon, it should have been an LMG. By equipping this weapon, which should have been a primary weapon, you're essentially having to waste a stratagem slot. Now, this would have been fine were the Stalwart better than all of the other primary choices, but this is not the case. There are regular primary weapons that are simply better than this support weapon, and don't have to waste a stratagem slot for it. For Terminid, the Stalwart is great at dealing with large swarms, being able to melt big bug breaches, plus struggles against chargers, and does nothing against Bio-Titans. For automatons, due to its lack of armor penetration, it doesn't penetrate any armor, making pretty much every bot resist most of your shots, making it a far less good of a choice than most of the other weapons on this list. Now a weapon that's on a similar note is the machine gun, which comes up here in 7th place. I think everyone that plays Helldivers 2 has a phase in their early days where they use the machine gun most games, as you unlock it very early on. And most of us have a special place in our heart for this weapon, as it helped us through most of the lower difficulties. The machine gun has the armor penetration that the Stalwart lacks, but it's less viable to constantly use it as a primary weapon, as the reload actually requires you to crouch, and ammo is not quite as abundant. The machine gun is a better choice for dealing with Terminid swarms, obliterating everything up to a heavy armored targets, such as the chargers and the Bio-Titans. It is a much more powerful weapon, however, allowing you to just lay down fire right into large swarms without much concern of who you're shooting at, since it penetrates so many different units. For automatons, however, the machine gun is a little bit less valuable as you're dealing with ranged units, and this machine gun will force you to expose yourself for long periods of time laying down fire, making you a very easy target to get shot or hit by rockets. And as a solo player, the automatons' focus are entirely on you, so you can't quite afford to expose yourself for long periods of time without cover, or else you won't be getting very far. And not just that, but even for group play, the machine gun is a little bit worse in automaton factions, as there are many more units that can resist the armor penetration offered by this weapon. And seeing how higher difficulties increase the amount of armored units in the world, then the machine gun starts becoming less and less valuable the higher difficulty you play. At 6th place, we've got the Recoilless Rifle. It was rough to rank it this low, seeing how the Recoilless Rifle is an amazing support weapon for group play, but for solo players, it just isn't nearly as good. In group play, you can reload these rifles extremely quickly, being able to take down Bile Titans far before they reach anywhere near your squad. But as a solo player, the reload time for it is quite long and very dangerous to do so when playing against very armored units. You cannot one-hit hulks or tanks if not hitting them in their heat sink, whereas some of the other options in this list can. It also can't quite hit as hard as expendable anti-tanks, and the most important downside of it is that we occupy our backpack slots when equipped with this rifle. As a solo player, it's almost a necessity for us to equip ourselves with a backpack stratagem for the vast majority of the missions, making any support weapon that demands a backpack slot far less valuable when in solo play. Now that's not to take away from the Recoilless Rifle and say that it's bad at all. It's actually a fantastic support weapon. It can one-hit leg armor off of chargers, making them an easy target to take down. It also only takes a few hits to the Bile Titans phase to take them down as well. Against automatons, it only takes one rocket to any heatsink to destroy an armored tank, as well as hulks or turret towers. And it can even one-hit dropship engines, being able to fully destroy automaton reinforcements every time they come around, which is quite an amazing thing to do. We're not necessary to carry its backpack for reload, and this weapon would be much higher on this list, but I simply can't recommend it over the next few choices, as these downsides are far too large to ignore in solo play. And the other ones in this list do a better job than the Recoilless Rifle in many different areas. Speaking of which, for the 5th place comes a support weapon that is fairly similar to the Recoilless Rifle, but functions a little bit differently, the Expendable Anti-Tank. Personally, I love the Expendable Anti-Tank, which we'll be calling it EAT for now. And this weapon was my weapon of choice all the way until level 20, and in my opinion, it does everything the Recoilless Rifle does, but better. For a solo player, that is. It sounds a bit bad to only get 2 shots every time you call down this stratagem, but this stratagem has a very short cooldown of only 70 seconds. And the thing is, with just these 2 shots, you've got enough firepower to take down a full health Bile Titan by blowing up its face, and enough firepower to take down 2 chargers by taking out their leg armor every 70 seconds. Assuming you don't have a ship module, of course, which reduces this cooldown even further. The damage on the EAT is higher than the Recoilless Rifle, making it an amazing option for dealing with armored targets. The problem with the EAT is that the higher difficulties will of course have more and more armored units, and even with a low 70-second cooldown, it may sometimes not be enough to have enough firepower to deal with all of the heavy armored units you've got to deal with. Up until rank 20, I'd recommend the EAT for anyone that struggles with armored units, as long as you learn where it is that you have to shoot to kill these units as fast as you can. And of course, you don't need to carry any backpacks for this weapon, which means you can of course equip yourself with a shield or a jump pack or whatever you'd like by using the support weapon. For the automaton faction, the EAT can also one-hit most of its armor targets. It can 2-hit hulks right in their face, or it can 1-hit tanks, hulks, and turret towers by hitting them in the back right in their heat sink. The EAT can of course as well 1-hit dropship engines, meaning you can take down 2 reinforcement dropships, as you can fire those 2 rockets much faster with the EATs when comparing with the Recoilless Rifle. So in most senses, it's just an upgraded version of the rifle for solo players. In 4th place, we've got the Anti-Materiel Rifle. The sniper rifle is a very strong hitting sniper rifle that can penetrate most armor types and can one-hit a lot of different types of units, and only takes a few hits to take down hulks and even blow up leg armors from chargers as well. And you can even use the sniper rifle for most of the game if equipped with a supply pack, as ammo is not such a horrible issue with this weapon. The problem with the AMR is that it's just a weaker version of the Railgun and doesn't have the same capability of dealing with armored targets, and due to it being a very single target based weapon, you might find yourself getting swarmed if you're not careful and actually spend time dealing with the ever-growing numbers of bugs. For the Terminid faction, the AMR is pretty good, being able to somewhat efficiently deal with chargers, and very effectively dealing with spewers and hive guards. But where the AMR truly shines is against the automatons. You're able to very efficiently deal with hulks, taking them out in only a few shots, and you can destroy all of the medium armored units such as devastators, berserkers, and so on. And seeing how automatons will oftentimes keep their distance from you, it gives you enough space to absolutely destroy these units without having to expose yourself as much. You can use the AMR to be very conservative with your ammo, carefully taking your shots, or you can even shoot the AMR extremely quickly, being able to quickly deal with large targets, but this will make your shots be very inaccurate. Just be careful with the aim flinch in this game, which actually hits quite strong, and you'll be good to go. You could use a shield to allow yourself to flinch less with this weapon, or even supply packs if you just love your sniper rifles. Now moving on to the third best choice in this list is the Autocannon. The only reason I don't rank this any higher is that you have to waste a backpack slot to allow yourself to equip the Autocannon. The Autocannon in itself is an absolute beast of a weapon, and just like the Railgun, it's one of the only weapons that is literally effective against every enemy type in the game. The Autocannon is very effective against heavy armored units, but you have to pay attention to the angle at which you're shooting the enemies. Whereas for the Railgun, you won't really have to. If you shoot at an armored target at an off angle, it will cause your shot to bounce off of the armor and not actually do any damage. So you must pay attention to shoot directly straight at the target. Make sure that shot is not gonna bounce off. Against the Terminid, it's fantastic at dealing with all types of units, including swarms, as the cannon does have a little bit of AoE damage to it, and it can even destroy bug holes and automaton factories with just one shot. Against Biotitans is not as effective as the Railgun, but if you land lots of direct hits to these beasts, then you're actually able to take them down somewhat easily. This weapon is fairly versatile as it's got lots of armor damage, lots of ammo, is good against swarms and armored units, and it's effective against both Terminid and automatons. So there aren't many situations where it's bad to be equipped with an autocannon. Against automatons is very effective against hulks and of course all of the different heat sinks, and it can absolutely obliterate any medium-sized units like berserkers and devastators and striders, and you don't even really need to be accurate with it either. The biggest issue is going to be the backpack you're forced to bring, which is going to oftentimes seriously hinder you when you're playing solo, as oftentimes you need that backpack stratagem, especially against Terminid factions, as they're equipped with hundreds of different units, all of which can stagger you with one little lick. Still though, you oftentimes won't be bad off by bringing an autocannon to any mission type. Now in second place, we've got the grenade launcher, and I can just tell that this will be a controversial opinion to some players, but hear me out. The grenade launcher is the most effective swarm clearing weapon in the entire game, being able to one-hit all small-sized units to even mid-sized units, and is able to trivialize striders and bile spewers, being able to take these down with only 1 to 2 grenades. For the automatons, you can fire several shots at a dropship and essentially be able to kill every passenger in that dropship, assuming those passengers aren't hulks or tanks. You can also shoot the grenade launcher shots in between hulks' legs, which isn't very hard to do, assuming the hulk isn't on high ground, and it'll take down a hulk with only 2 to 3 grenades. It can also take down all sorts of heat sinks with only a few shots. For the Terminid faction, it destroys every type of unit up to a charger, so in other words, the grenade launcher can absolutely destroy all types of units in this game, with the exception of chargers, biotitans, and tanks if the heatsink isn't exposed. And that's where the following bit of information will be invaluable to using grenade launchers. The synergy matters. Knowing you're bringing a grenade launcher on your mission, and you can accompany that selection by bringing in armor penetration stratagems that will cover your current loadout's weaknesses. Usually, you'll get a support weapon that can deal with armored units, and you'll have a few swarm dealing stratagems, but with the grenade launcher, you actually just swap it the other way around. You choose this swarm dealing support weapon, and you equip yourself with armored dealing stratagems such as the rocket pods and rail cannon strike, which will oftentimes be enough to deal with all of the armor threats you'll be going up against. The grenade launcher is also great for players looking to speed through their missions, being able to one-hit factories, destroy airships from a distance, and close off bug holes, making missions oftentimes a lot easier to deal with. Now lastly, in first place, we've got the holy grail of support weapons, the Railgun. The Railgun is simply better at nearly everything when compared to all of the other options we've mentioned. It's the best armored unit dealing weapon, being able to one-hit Devastators, one-hit Hulks in their weak spots, being able to 2-hit a Charger's leg armor off, being able to take down a Bio-Titan with only 10 shots or so, which can be done within only a couple of seconds, and it can also one-hit Striders and Hive Guards, even through its thickest of armors. The weapon can also be reloaded while running, packs 20 shots with no upgrades, does not use a backpack slot, and is the best choice in the game to take pop shots off of cover, being able to trivialize a lot of different automaton units. It will be your best choice for the vast majority of your solo missions, as it will give you the most mobility, flexibility, as well as damage and armor penetration. And its ammo count will oftentimes never really be an issue either. The only thing that you could argue against the Railgun is that since it's a one target type weapon, you can find yourself overwhelmed by numbers if you're not careful. But that'll come down to the player not making the mistake of overusing the Railgun when really they should be thinning down enemy numbers. So there's not much else to say about the Railgun. It simply is the king of weapons for solo play, and I have an entire video covering this weapon. And by the way, you can even set this weapon to unsafe mode for more damage, even though personally I never really use it. It just shouldn't go unmentioned. So that'll be all for today's video. Let me know in the comment section below if you would have this list reordered and how you would go on about doing that. I'll catch you guys in the next video. Thank you guys very much for watching. Now go ahead and spread some democracy, Helldivers. Peace.